There's an old American business proverb.
Yes.
Goes something like this. Never ask the barber if you need a haircut. And it makes sense on the face of it, right? I mean, why would the barber tell you, no,
Right.
you look good. See you in a couple weeks.
Right.
It doesn't happen. Because the barber definitely has a very vested interest.
And you getting your haircut as many times as possible.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. This is a concept called incentive cost bias. And that if someone has a vested interest in something happening, they also will tend to guide you in the direction of their interest.
Sure.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, if people have a vested interest in something happening, I mean, this is the theory behind stock options. If executives of a company own a lot of the stock of that company, then they should have a vested interest in making that stock go up, right?
Yeah.
The problem comes when they actually have a vested interest in making the stock go up right before they sell it, and they don't care what happens after that.
Thanks.
So incentives are often extremely tricky business because, you know, people have incentives to do certain things, but those incentives may not be directly lined up with yours. And we touched on this in a little bit when we were talking about the buffers and agents and the affiliate model of, you know, for example, when you're working with a real estate agent, their interest is, if they're paid on a commission, their interest is not necessarily making sure you make the right decision when it comes to buying a house for you. Their interest is in helping you find a house that you eventually purchase, whether or not it's a good idea. Same thing goes with people in the mortgage lending industry. They have an interest in you taking out a loan, whether or not it's necessarily a good idea for you. You know, same thing goes with, you know, agents and brokers and all sorts of people who have a vested interest in you doing something specific.
Yeah, this is how they're incentivized. It doesn't mean every single person operates like this, but in a broad stroke.
Right.
Yeah.
But we all tend to respond to the things that are good for us. I mean, it's natural. There's nothing particularly wrong with this. It's a fact of the matter of people have interests in certain things happening. And you need to be very aware of, you know, when you're dealing with someone else, you know, whether it's an employee or a supplier or a partner or a broker or an agent or whatever, be very, very clear about what their incentives are. Because if you don't understand their incentives, you don't understand what they're rewarded for. You could comply with a situation that is not necessarily in your best interest. You know, the other thing too is sometimes people get incentives to do things like, for the example, you know, the executive stock compensation thing. They have an incentive to do something that should be in the best interest of the company, right? You know, make the company worth more, and therefore the executive is worth more. But depending upon how the incentive is structured, that may or may not be a good thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, if an executive is interested in cashing out all of their options, you know, they may choose to do things that in the short run will get the thing they want, but in the long run can have an extremely detrimental effect on the company as a whole.
Absolutely. And, you know, you really have to worry about this with your employees as well. Not the place I used to work, but a different bridal shop that I worked in once where the price range was much, 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 much bigger. Dresses were from like $150 to like $10,000. We had this major problem with a specific salesperson like stealing what she perceived to be high-end customers. And no matter how we tried to go about it, we couldn't solve it because she really wanted to get the commissions from the high-end sales. So the way we ended up solving it was incentivizing everyone in a different way. Instead of incentivizing them based on how expensive the gowns were, which was becoming very, very, very like bad, we incentivized everybody on closing. Didn't matter how expensive the dress was. So it was really more about finding what was right for the customer. And it totally changed the way the whole staff felt about each other. And it made such a big difference.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the salespeople and incentives because, you know, typically selling on commission or something, there's an incentive to close a sale, right?
Well, sure.
But go back to qualification. Not every customer that you sell is a good customer or a customer you want to serve. And so sometimes, and this often happens in companies where, you know, they'll bring on a commissioned salesperson who will promise the moon to people just to close the sale. Because once the sale is closed, they get compensated and it's not their problem anymore.
Yep.
They don't have to deal with it. They don't have to do anything. You know, it's engineering or, you know, whoever, customer service or whatever. They don't have to deal with it. They've done their part. So incentive cost bias is really important, even internally.
Yeah.
Working with your sales folks, because you don't want to give people an incentive to do
make
something.
a stupid sale.
Yeah, to make a stupid sale, something bad for the company. Actually, I think this is in the Knack, which is also a book on the personal MBA reading list. They talk about how it's often smart. You know, it's common to pay salespeople on commission. It's often smarter, believe it or not, to pay them a salary, even if it's a really big one.
Totally.
Because then they're compensated no matter what. And, you know, sure, you're going to have goals, you're going to have things that they're going to be shooting for, but their compensation is not tied to whether a sale is made or not. As long as they're bringing in business for the company and they're being rewarded commensurate to what they're bringing in, having them be on a salary is actually more beneficial because they make far less dumb sales.
Yeah, it's really good not to operate from fear.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's also a lot of science, and this is a little tangential, but related to incentives. If you're relying on people to be motivated about their work, giving them an incentive to do it, sounds like you want to make them do it more, right? Actually, it has the opposite effect, which is a little bit counterintuitive.
How so?
If someone, you know, for example, let's say one of the people in the company thinks the walkway leading up to the office is boring, so they start planting flowers.
Oh, okay.
And they do it because, you know,
They think it's important.
They think it's important, and they're trying to make things better. And you recognize that, and you say, you know what, you're doing really good work. We're going to raise your salary to reward you for this.
Put you in charge of flowers.
And put you in charge of flowers. What does that do?
Probably makes it, it's weird, but it probably makes it not as fun.
Yeah, it does.
That's
And
crazy.
people often stop doing it because originally it was something that they did because they wanted to, and now they're being incentivized or they're paid for it.
That seems really difficult to work with.
Yes, and it is. And there's actually a book. I haven't read the book yet. It's on my list. By Dan Pink that just came out called Driven, I think.
Oh.
And
okay.
it talks about intrinsic motivation and rewards and all those things. So if this is something that you're dealing with, it's probably worthwhile to take a look at that. But yeah, incentives are tricky. So understand that incentives may not line up exactly to what you want to happen and can often do the exact opposite thing that you think they're doing. So tricky business, and be always aware of incentive cause bias.